The following month, Congress agreed that the National Guard and other reserves should be called up for 1 year's active duty. And in September, the large expansion of the 150,000-strong U.S. Army was agreed, with a limited number of conscripts being chosen by lottery.
The first number drawn by the Secretary of War is serial number 158.
That same month, Roosevelt announced a deal under which the U.S. would supply Britain with 50 World War I destroyers in return for 99-year leases on bases in Newfoundland and the Caribbean. The British Navy, desperate for more escorts to fight the U-boats, began taking them over within days of the deal being signed. The clearest sign that Roosevelt was slowly winning the argument came in the November 1940 presidential election, when he convincingly defeated the isolationist Wendell Willkie with 27 million votes to 22 million. At the end of the year, Roosevelt spoke to the American people, setting out the 4 essential freedoms which he believed were at stake, and which Britain was fighting to uphold. Freedom of speech and religion, and freedom from want and from fear. To save these, the United States must become the arsenal of the democracies. In other words, it must arm Britain.
We shall send you in ever-increasing numbers ships, planes, tanks, guns. That is our purpose and our pledge.
But some Americans remained implacably opposed to helping Britain. One of the most outspoken was the American ambassador in London, Joseph Kennedy, father of the future president, John F. Kennedy. A Boston Irish businessman who had made his fortune booze smuggling during Prohibition, Kennedy hated the British and seized every opportunity to claim that they would shortly be forced to surrender. However, Kennedy's virulence was counterbalanced by the growing admiration many Americans felt for the bravery shown by the British people during the Blitz. In particular, the broadcasts by the CBS London correspondent Ed Murrow helped to change public opinion.
This is London. I remember the evening of Sunday, December 29th. It was just like any other winter evening. The first bombers were over London at about 6:30. Soon the fires hissed from the top-story windows. Hitler once boasted, "I will rub out their cities." This is what he meant.
Encouraged by his electoral success, in January 1941, Roosevelt introduced his so-called Lend-Lease Bill. The United States would supply weapons and war material to Britain and China, which was still struggling desperately against the invading Japanese. Payment would be delayed. Roosevelt likened Lend-Lease to lending a neighbor a hose to put out a fire. He would worry about the payback later. Roosevelt was also being canny. It also meant that, unlike in 1917, if America had to enter the war, it already would have a substantial weapons industry. American war preparations didn't end there. Roosevelt secretly authorized U.S. military staffs to discuss a common strategy with the British should America enter the war. By April 1941, he felt confident enough to take another step to help Britain at sea. He greatly extended the Pan-American Security Zone, the area within which U.S. warships would protect U.S. merchant vessels. In May, U.S. troops set up bases in Greenland, and in July, US Marines were sent to replace the British garrison in Iceland, which was there to deprive the Germans of its harbours. The US Navy also began providing limited convoy escorts, particularly for US ships carrying Lend-Lease materials. Hitler now gave his submariners strict instructions not to sink American ships, as he didn't want to provoke the United States into war. But inevitably, there were clashes. On September the 4th, 1941, a British aircraft attacked a German submarine. Thinking that the strike had come from the nearby US destroyer Greer, the U-boat fired a torpedo at it. The Greer responded with depth charges, and there was a running battle which lasted 3 hours. Neither vessel was sunk, but the tension was mounting. Since the mid-1930s, all the German armed forces and intelligence departments had adopted a standard machine for encoding their messages. The cipher machine E, better known as Enigma. It was developed in the early 1920s as a handy tool for businessmen to keep commercial messages secret. It was powered by a battery, and its encoded messages were transmitted in Morse code to be decoded on a second Enigma machine at the receiving end. The critical element of the machine was 3 rotors, which could be set to scramble the message in a way which could only be unscrambled by another machine with the same settings. The rotors could be replaced and set differently. As a result, each letter typed could come up in any one of 150 million ways. Given the almost infinite number of settings, it was not surprising that the Germans remained convinced throughout the war that Enigma was uncrackable. It was the Poles who took the first steps in solving this baffling puzzle. They knew of the existence of the Enigma machine and assembled a team of top mathematicians to crack it. Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rojicki, and Henry Zygalski. But the team could not decipher messages without knowing the internal wiring of the rotors. The solution was supplied by French intelligence, which sent its Polish allies material gathered by a spy in the German army's cipher department. Amongst this was an Enigma manual. The Poles were able to reconstruct an Enigma machine and began laboriously decoding messages. By July 1939, Hitler was sounding increasingly threatening towards Poland. Britain and France had promised to come to its aid. It was clear that war was coming. So intelligence officers from the 3 allies met in Warsaw. There, the British and French were astonished at how much the Poles had done in decoding Enigma, and the Poles agreed to send 2 of their reconstructed machines to London. Just 2 weeks after they were handed over, Poland was invaded. By the time Poland fell to the Germans, the Polish cryptographers had destroyed all evidence of their work on Enigma. Some were captured and tortured, but none revealed what they'd been up to. The task was now taken up by the British at their government code and cipher school at Bletchley Park, near London. Its head was Commander Alistair Denniston. Denniston recruited a strange collection of mathematicians, chess masters, and crossword puzzle experts to continue the decoding. Among these experts was Alan Turing, a Cambridge Don. In 1936, Turing had described the idea of a universal computing machine, a machine that he believed would one day be able to solve all mathematical problems. He used his ideas to design decryption machines known as bronze goddesses. The raw material for Bletchley came from the British Y service, a chain of radio listening stations which monitored and recorded German transmissions. The messages were fed into Bletchley's bronze goddesses, and permutations ran until at last the key was found. Once a message had been decrypted, it was translated, analyzed, and passed on to the appropriate authorities.